This is a reading from the second chapter of Luke. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. I will never be entirely certain, but I believe that when I was 6 or 7, I saw a bald eagle sitting on a dead branch near the top of a dead tree as my family drove home from town at the end of a weekday. It was certainly a bird I had never seen before. No one else in my family saw it. We were on the steepest, rockiest portion of the river road home, the part where you had to be careful how you drove through the boulders in order to prevent knocking the muffler off or getting high centered. So my dad was driving, my mom was talking to him, my sister was probably reading, and I was lying down in the back seat, my head resting in the middle, my feet near the door, watching out the window, and then at the top of this empty spar, this enormous bird with a white head perched without moving. And I looked at it as we passed and then sat up and looked back and couldn't see it anymore. And nobody in the car said anything. My doubt about whether I saw a bald eagle when I was 6 or 7 is not about whether or not it was a bald eagle. It certainly was. It has always been about whether I saw a bird, any bird at all, or whether I imagined it. Bald eagles were extremely rare when I was that age, and also a regular topic in the news. They were dying off because of the use of the pesticide DDT. While Arkansas was part of their original range, they were now almost completely absent from there. That I would have seen a bald eagle perched on a dead tree on a slope above the White River Valley seems extremely unlikely. But it seems even less likely that I would have had a visual hallucination at the end of a school day, completely unprompted and as healthy as I ever was. As a consequence of these questions, of my inability to know whether I actually saw this bird or not, the image of this bird is one of my most vivid memories. I cannot describe it in words, but it is always ready for viewing in the images catalog of my memory. I'm always able to see this enormous bird appear sitting on that spar within the frame of the car window for a second and then be gone. Around the workplace, kind of as a joke, but often with seriousness, we tend to hear the expression, "What have you done for me lately?" By which we tend to mean that in our human estimation, we are only ever as good as we are right now, and not as good as we were 2 years ago. But this does not appear to be how God works. Twice in the Gospel of Luke, we are told that Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. I take that to mean that Mary was Jesus' first witness and disciple, looking at his life, at what he said and did, at how others responded, taking these images and words, reflecting on them, figuring what they added up to and what they meant. She certainly knew before anyone else did that Jesus was the Son of God. Well, what did that actually mean to be the Son of God? What did that mean about her son Jesus? And what did that mean about God? Every day she was learning what that meant based on what happened today and also what happened yesterday and last year and 10 years ago and on the day he was born. There are some people who, in a few moments or across the course of a day, have the powerful experience of God's presence that we call a mystical experience. Sometimes it's an actual vision of God. Sometimes it's the overpowering of one's heart with love for creation. Sometimes, especially a sense of the brokenheartedness of humanity. Sometimes the world takes on a different color. Sometimes it is an unexpected feeling of power and the cessation of fear. There are many forms of mystical experience. But one thing they have in common is that the great majority of persons who have a mystical experience have only one. They are drawn into the absolutely persuasive presence of God, and then, as Mary did, they treasure up these things and ponder them in their hearts. One such mystic was the woman we know as Julian of Norwich, who lived in the British city of Norwich from around 1343 to around 1416. We know almost nothing about her except for her mystical experience. When she was about 30, she was so seriously ill she believed herself to be on her deathbed, and a priest came and administered last rites. In the midst of that ritual, and for some hours afterward, Julian received a series of visions of Christ or from Christ. She recovered from her illness and wrote two versions of her experiences, the earlier text being completed soon after her recovery, and a much longer version, today known as the long text, written many years later. Julian has received a great deal of attention in the 20th and 21st centuries, and it's possible that you might be acquainted with one of the images that she was shown, one that we tend to think of as the vision of the hazelnut, though she never says that what she held in her hand was actually the hazelnut. In her long text, she wrote, "And in this Christ showed me a little thing, the quantity of a hazelnut, lying in the palm of my hand, as it seemed. And it was as round as any ball. I looked upon it with the eye of my understanding and thought, what may this be? And it was answered generally thus, it is all that is made. I marveled how it might last, for I thought it might suddenly have fallen to nothing for littleness. And I was answered in my understanding, it lasts and ever shall, for God loves it. And so have all things their beginning by the love of God. In this little thing, I saw three properties. The first is that God made it. The second, that God loves it. And the third, that God keeps it." There would be much to talk about in this account of God sustaining all of creation purely from God's love of the creation. But what interests me today is the time between Julian's visions and her eventual understanding of them. Scholars are in general agreement that Julian wrote the long text of her visions 20 or more years after they originally appeared to her. The difference between the short text and the long text is the theological reflection that she has spent on those visions and the eventual theological understandings at which she has arrived. At first, she has a little thing like a ball lying in her hand. Eventually, she has the understanding that the entire universe of things is held in being and prevented from falling into nothingness because God loves everything that God made. As the theologian Regis Martin writes, Julian comes to understand that indeed things are precisely because God loves them. They receive their being only in virtue of this love. And so in her conversation with Christ, the Lady Julian comes to see in that tiny little hazelnut the crystallization of three truths on which everything depends. The first is that God made the hazelnut, it being quite unthinkable that the hazelnut could account for its own existence. The second is that God loves the hazelnut. Why otherwise would he fashion something he could not love? There must accordingly be something good, lovely even, in all that God made. And finally, that God looks after that hazelnut from moment to moment. What I find especially relevant in Julian's experience in light of the times that we live in is the idea that our life with God is not and cannot be an expectation of God's constant performance. We don't look at God and say, "What have you done for me lately?" We do, of course, look for God's presence in this moment, but we also look for and wonder at God's presence in our past. We store up and treasure the moments when God's love has been obvious to us, usually not in a mystical experience, but in the support and comfort of a friend, in an uncharacteristic act of courage, in a meaningful increase of our capacity to be kind. We take note of those things. We treasure them in our hearts. We ponder them. We bring them forward with us, like the glimpse of an eagle for 2 seconds 50 years ago. The presence of God is accumulative, and it is our own selves who are cheated when we fail to return over and over to the places where God has been visible to us.